All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our workshop, which is an undergraduate research survival guide. So if you're here, we're hoping that you'll be excited about possibly pursuing your own research opportunities or just learning more about what STEM research has to offer. And so just before we get started, we wanted to give you a heads up that we've opted to record our workshop so that other people can access it as well. So just know that if you ask any questions or if you participate, you will be caught on that recording. So feel free to opt in or out based on your preference. But we'll get started and we'll also be recording. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming. We hope you're having a great time at Technica. So just to introduce ourselves briefly, my name is Rakshita Balaji. I'm a neuroscience major here at UMD.
Hi, I'm Sagar. I'm a computer science major and also a graduate student at UMD.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm a microbiome major, and I just came from work, so that's why I'm dressed like this. I'm sorry.
And we also have Sanjana. Sanjana, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sanjana. I'm a neuroscience.
Are interested in, to some degree, about research in different particular fields, regardless of whether it's something you want to create into your career or not. We all have insight that we can probably share with you. So feel free to ask us any questions and keep in mind kind of like the different disciplines that we have available. And so we also wanted to give you a little bit of information about ourselves. So we're Rising Researchers. We're a club here at UMD. We're still pretty young, but we have this organization where we have undergraduate students as well as graduate students at UMD who have different experiences with research. And we come together to volunteer and deliver workshops just like these, as well as to create free content for anyone who's also interested in pursuing research or even any career in STEM. So we would love if you wanted to interact with us. We have some more information at the end about how you can stay connected. But all of our material is free to use, and we're very happy to answer your questions as well. And we also did a community event with Technica over the summer, so you might have seen us there. Do you want to introduce what we're talking about?
So today we'll break it down into a couple of sections. First, we'll talk about CS and research. So what are the types of opportunities you see and what does it really mean to have CS and research together? Next, we'll talk about how you can actually find your lab, how you can go to the right lab and find the right mentor for yourself. Then once you've found your lab, we'll talk about what happens next. What happens once you've joined a lab, once you've actually joined that environment. Finally, we'll end with a myth or fact activity, debunking some of the common misconceptions about the research process, and also a Q&A, so you guys can ask us anything. We'll have like a panel session essentially, and you all can ask us about research. So let's first get started by talking about CS and research. So how do CS and research really come together? So there are three ways that we've outlined how CS and research come together. The first is theoretical research. This is like the more traditional view of CS research that you might be used to. So if you're currently just joined a university, you're a freshman or a sophomore, and you're doing those intro level classes, then CS and research, maybe if you think about it, like maybe designing better algorithms or designing better programming languages, this might be something that you've seen in classes. And this would be like the more traditional view of CS research. There's also applied research, which is how CS can be applied to solve real problems. So how we can take those concepts from theoretical research and put them into a real life scenario and maybe, actually deploy those into real life scenarios as well. So a lot of research also focuses on the applied side. Finally, there's also a lot of research on tooling and data science, applying CS to all non-CS research fields. So even if you're here and you're not really sure if CS is right for you, but you would like to do research, you could still end up using a lot of computer science in your research. You can use it to do a lot of data analysis, look at trends, and do a lot of that research outside of a wet lab. Okay. If the slides
Press
progress.
the button. There you go.
Nice. Okay. So looking a little bit deeper into like what this might look like in theoretical research, you might see a paper like a new efficient radix sort. So maybe all of you are used to sorts and sorting algorithms. So maybe a researcher will come up with a better sorting algorithm. And that might be more towards how theoretical research works. Applied research. So there's this research paper by a professor at UMD on detecting and evading censorship. So this is like a study in Iran. So they wanted to write a technique, a method to actually evade censorship in these countries where censorship is a huge problem and kind of give free speech to people. So that would be more applied research. Then tooling and data science. Okay, I don't entirely know what ganglion cells are. I'm sure these two wonderful researchers will tell us. But you could also use these research CS tools to, work in other fields. So in this case,
neuroscience. So ganglionic cells or cells in your retina, they help to encode information about the world around you through your eyes and waves of light. And so a scientist here at UMD has been able to use data science to handle large data sets from recordings from actual animals and to build models of what we think might be going on in the brain when we are looking at different objects. So that's the tooling and data science part is applied in neuroscience.
thanks, Rakshita. Okay. Oh, I see there's some chats. Maybe I'll pause. Oh, okay. Just a welcome. This workshop will be recorded. Okay, great. So you can also have combinations of both any of these. These don't need to be separate categories. So maybe something that's both in theoretical and applied could be Bitcoin, which both introduce this idea of using the blockchain for a finance application, but also applied since they were able to develop Bitcoin, which now all of us know and maybe like or don't like. And on the other side, you could also have a similar thing with D3, which was a data-driven documents paper. And there it's applied since you're using these graphs in real web pages, and they showed how this could be used there. But also tooling and data science, since anyone in any field can use those tools to kind of showcase their research and showcase the results. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about how you actually find these opportunities, especially on campus. So first of all, your professors, as you guys probably have found out by now, most professors do have their own research. And if you have like a class you really like, or if you're just like looking on the department website and find a professor whose research that you're interested in, you can reach out to them. And we'll go over how to do that soon and see if they have any positions open in their lab. And that's the way you can get involved. And so cold emailing kind of goes along with this. Except it's not like a professor that you have in a class. So you can check out the department website of things that you're interested in and see which labs seem cool to you. And then you can reach out to that professor and let them know you're interested, and hopefully like you can get connected with someone. And then there's the UMD Research Database, which is a website for UMD students that PIs or principal investigators, which are like in charge of the lab, they like post if they need help in their lab, and you can like look through them and see if any of those opportunities really speak to you. And then finally, you can do independent research. And so, especially for computer science, this is a way you can do your own research projects. And you can receive credit for your work by making it your honors thesis or a citation. And there are like some programs at UMD if you're interested in that.
Okay, so now let's kind of talk about writing a cold email. I don't know why I walked around. That was okay. So the first thing that you'll want to do is start with some background research. You'll want to start by researching the professor. So maybe find their website, find their Google Scholar page, and this will give you a lot of details on what the professor is doing and what kind of work that they might be looking to get students to join on. You'll also want to read the abstracts of at least 1 or 2 papers that they've written recently. You don't need to read the entire paper. You don't need to understand the entire paper, but definitely have a good idea of what they're doing and maybe like pull out some key terms that you understand intellectually. Finally, just read about any current projects that they're working on. So their website should have this information if they have one. If they don't, you can also ask grad students or students working in their lab if that's publicly available. Just look online and see if you can find something. And if not, just use the recent papers. So let's imagine that we have this research professor called Dr. Pup. We see that they are in the Department of Computer Science and they're at UMD and they do research in machine learning and computer vision. If you look on Google Scholar, maybe you find these 2 papers here. One is on ImageNet classification with deep convolutional neural networks. The other is on dropout. And And so you can just kind of like sort by the year, sort by the citation, see what they're most cited on, see which one of their most recent papers, and use those to as like talking points. So for obvious reasons, these two papers are not written by Dr. Pup, but for the purpose of this workshop, we will continue with that assumption. And maybe you check their webpage and you look at their current projects and you say, they're looking at deep convolutional neural networks to improve enemy friend cat dog classifiers. So this might be like an example of what you see when you're looking for a professor. So the next thing that you'll do is you start your email and introduce yourself. So I would say, hi, hello, Dr. Pup. And then my name is Sagar. I'm a first year computer science major at UMD. So mention your name, your university, your year in class. That's all just good things to start off with. The next thing that you might want to do is mention your interests and what led to you reaching out. So I could say that I recently came across your profile on Google Scholar. I noticed that you were pursuing research in ML and CV. So quickly off the bat, just introducing, here's why I'm reaching out to you. Here's what I found about you that led to me reaching out to you. And you can also just say, I would love to get more experience in these fields and wanted to know if you'd be available to me to discuss your current research. So very quickly putting that the importance of the email, you'd like to set up a meeting. And usually it's key if you're looking for a position, don't just say, I'm looking for a position. Ask them to talk about their current research, have that conversation with them. And once you have the conversation, it can lead to, let's have you join my lab, let's have you get a position here. The process can be a little informal, but it's usually best to start by just talking about their research, because worst case scenario, they meet with you, they talk about your interests, and they refer you to another professor. So there's definitely no harm in reaching out and meeting with that professor. Yes. No, definitely not. As long as you're interested in that topic, in that field, you can reach out and they'll probably be happy to talk to you. So you don't need to be in the same major. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I will continue then. So after this first paragraph, maybe this is all the professor really reads, because every now and then we'll get those professors that have those one-line responses and they'll just say, fine, sounds good.
Sent from
Period.
my iPhone.
Yeah, signed from my iPhone. Yeah, sent from my iPhone, yeah. So this is great to start off with. And I see a question in the back. So yes, what's up? So I'll get to that next. So this is just the first paragraph. This can be like a good intro, but let's say the professor is actually very analytical. They get a lot of these emails. They'll want to go one step further. So now if I'm going to the next thing, you'll want to like pull from those papers that you read, pull from those projects that you are interested in, that they're interested in, and kind of mention those things. So we have this abstract here. I won't read this entire abstract to you or expect you all to read it. But the main thing that they say here in this abstract, they say somewhere in between that they use these deep convolutional neural networks. They use it on a competition called ImageNet, and they were able to present really good results. Now, there's a lot more going on, a lot of technical components here, and a lot that you can kind of just ignore if you don't understand, which is fine. You don't want to be talking about these technical components in your email unless you understand them. So if I was to email, I really like your softmax, use of softmax, the professor is going to ask you about that. So make sure that you just keep it to things that you relate to, things that make sense to you. But so I could continue after that first paragraph and say, I recently read your paper, and then mention that paper. And I'm just saying I was amazed by the results you had achieved on the ImageNet contest. And I'm particularly interested in how you're planning on applying this model to that enemy friend classification problem. So in this way, in this paragraph, I've mentioned a paper that they were working on. I've pulled from this abstract to see like those details of that paper and also talked about their current project. So the second paragraph can be good for this. You're talking about those details, diving deeper into it. Okay. I'll just continue. You can also kind of talk about any deeper experiences you have. So if you don't have much experience, then that can be enough. But if you have previous experience, maybe you've taken a course at school, you've taken a course online, maybe you've attended a hackathon and done a project on something similar, then you can mention those things in this email as well. So maybe when I talked about my interest in machine learning and computer vision, I can also mention that I recently completed a course and would like to get more experience. I could also mention maybe in that second paragraph that I also worked with deep convolutional neural networks and done them on toy applications, but I want to work with other more real world applications. So you can just tie in these personal experiences as well into these paragraphs to kind of talk about your experience and your skills if you have them. But if you don't, it's completely fine. It's okay to enter into a lab with no experience. It's more important that you're interested, and that's what the professors are really looking to see. Finally, when you're ending this email, just make sure that you mention your availability, have an action item for that professor, and definitely just like emphasize your interest again, emphasize that you're excited about this, and end with like a thanks and just send it off. So that's really the email. So first talk about, a quick introduction, how you found them, then maybe a deeper paragraph on their specific research or projects. And finally, just a way for them to set up some time and give them some availability. And that's really it to writing a cold email. And you'll see that this entire email is not that long. This entire email fits on the slide, and it doesn't need to be a huge resume of who you are and what your experiences are. You're just trying to reach out to this professor, connect with them, and set up that initial meeting. And after that, that's when you can bring in a resume. You can talk about your experiences. You can give that pitch on how you are doing. And I think we'll pass that off. So any questions on the cold email as far as this goes? And if you're on Zoom, you can also send in the chat. I will check the chat.
And to inject another thing into what Sagar was saying about resumes, if you do have a resume that you've created, or maybe a CV with your experiences, feel free to attach that. Sometimes a professor, especially if they're busy, they may just skip right to that if you hand it to them. So making sure that that's kind of fleshed out, you can use that to your advantage as well. But like Sagar's saying, including all of this information gives the professor a neat profile of whom you are. They know that you didn't just reach out generically to their lab, but that you actually are interested in what their specific work is doing, which already will make you stand out from other candidates. We have a chat.
Oh. I don't like how this is big, but okay.
Oh, you can stretch it.
Where will you see?
I believe the organizers will be able to send a recording in the chat, so they should have more information on that. Yeah. Okay, if that wasn't clear on Zoom, it will be available on the Technica platform after this workshop.
All right. If we have no more questions about those contents, or if you have questions that pop up later, feel free to let us know by the end. I see another chat, so I'll just double check. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Awesome. So I'm going to hide these, but we'll look at the chat again. All right, so working in the lab. What do I do after I've joined my lab? How do I make the most of my time? So I think, at least when I was starting out with research, this was the most mystifying kind of concept to me. Usually we think of like researchers maybe sitting alone in an ivory tower, like creating, like their own, I don't know, their own organism, being Dr. Frankenstein. And so you kind of want to think about like, okay, what is really happening behind those doors? What is the nature of research really like? And so we wanted to sort of bring you backstage and see like what you might actually end up doing once you join your lab. And so what happens now? So you found your brand new research home. It's really exciting, but now it's time to get into the work. And what exactly does that mean? So kind of like Sagar touched on earlier, you're more encouraged to learn when you're in a lab rather than to come in knowing things. Especially note that at your stage, especially as an undergrad, as a trainee, your first job is to just show that enthusiasm and to show that you're ready to learn new things and pick up based on what you're interested in and based on what the lab is ready to teach you. And so I would encourage you to note that like haste makes waste. So if you're coming in, having a realistic idea of, your skill level, making sure you didn't lie on your resume, making sure that you can communicate very clearly, this is what I know and this is what I need to learn, will help you to make the most of your time there as you're learning new things. My next point would be that reading is power. So how many of us here enjoy reading research papers? Wow, I didn't see that many hands. And on Zoom, I will let you know that I also didn't see many hands. And so this is something that is really important to understand, though, is that reading is powerful, and you'll get better at reading these papers as you get experience, even if it's not the most exciting thing right now. So all those papers that Sagar was showing, being able to translate it into something that maybe is more interesting or being able to digest that information takes time. It takes a lot of patience. You'll have to do maybe a lot of Googling to figure out what are these techniques that this lab is using? What does that piece of jargon that they use in the field mean? But once you kind of digest that and maybe treat it as an investigation, you'll see that there's a lot of information to be drawn from these papers that can really clue you into what the lab is interested in, what you might find yourself interested in when you join the lab, and it'll just help you to build that knowledge. And so also noting that, you're still learning and to be kind of patient with yourself as you're learning more and reading. But yeah, even if it means just going on the lab website and looking at recent publications and starting to kind of get that information into your own mind, it definitely helps with reading. So I hope to see more hands by the time that you guys join your labs. Explore projects in the lab even off duty. So what this means is that, maybe you're working under a specific graduate student or a postdoc or people that have gotten their PhD and are now working as scientists in the lab. You can feel free to explore projects and to ask people random questions, like, what are you working on? How does this help with what the lab is interested in? And when I say off duty, depending upon the nature of your lab, depending upon the protocols, you might be able to spend more time there than just the time that you're allotted to do your project. So ask if you're allowed to just come in randomly when you're in between classes and see what's going on. That was something that personally has really helped me, just sitting in the lab, even if it means doing my homework and then observing a cool technique and coming back. This might change based on the nature of the research. This might change based on whether you're in a wet lab or in a more theoretical lab. But depending upon the lab culture and depending on what your PI and your mentors are okay with, feel free to just explore and just ask around. There's really no wrong way to do that kind of exploration. And that kind of goes with my next point, which is just to ask a lot of questions to everyone. And so this means that, you might be meeting with the head of the lab, the principal investigator, when you first get onboarded, but there's plenty of people in the lab who are working on really cool things that you might want to learn more about. So feel free to go around and just ask people like, hey, what are you working on? What are you doing? What is your project about? What kind of challenges are you running into? And they can give you some insight into some of the projects that go on. And then reflect on your own curiosities. What is it that you want to do? So if you find that you're learning a lot of great things, but you're having these questions that are sort of coming from the same stem of the lab's interest, but you're kind of going off into your own tangent, reflect on that. Don't kind of dismiss it because you're at a stage where you're still learning. I think it's very easy to think about the fact that we, aren't necessarily at the same level of a graduate student or of the PI themselves, but those questions that you have can sometimes lead to the next, step in someone's project or can lead to the next step in your own understanding. So I would encourage you to just reflect on that, make lists of questions and continue to pursue what you're curious about, and try to start taking, some more initiative about what you might want to investigate in that lab. So things to do besides research, these are also some things that I wanted to highlight, those kinds of like off-duty things that you can do to continue getting more familiar with your research or with the lab. So attend talks. A lot of undergraduate institutions will host professors from other schools or will host graduate students within the school who will give some talks about their own research projects. And usually those talks are open to the public or even open to undergrads, or perhaps they're even open to the mentor for your lab who can invite you or let you know that they can sort of wing person you to that lab or to that talk. So feel free to attend those, look for those inside your institutions, and you might learn a lot about, other projects that people are doing at different schools or in different parts of the field that might spark some more interesting questions. Try to connect with other undergraduate research peers. So like we talked about, some opportunities you can pursue is doing an honors thesis, for example. You might even run into people in your classes who say, oh, I just got back from my lab, and you can ask like, what lab? And those spark really cool conversations too. And this can help you stay motivated as well. So sometimes, like we said, making those upward comparisons, looking at your productivity versus a graduate student versus a postdoc, sometimes you can feel sort of, that you're at the starting point, that you're the person that's doing most of the learning from the ground up. And so by connecting with other people who are in the same stage as you, it can even help you to motivate each other, maybe when you run into challenges, or if you want to just bounce ideas or writing off of each other, it helps too. Reflect often about what you learn and what sparks your curiosity. So I might have already said this, maybe it's a little bit of redundancy, but doing that reflection and maybe writing down, even each week, just being like, I did this, or this technique means this. You'll start to build your own field guide as to what you're learning in the lab, which can very much help you when you're trying to, ask your own questions or to catch on to some projects that you might be doing. And this is, again, those off-duty things you can do, getting to know your lab, spending time in the lab, even without specific duties, can help you learn a lot more. And so sometimes, let's see, I'll go into that next, but we also want to encourage you to take care of yourselves. So the process of research is one that is not linear. You might have learned about scientific method, and while that does hold to help you investigate certain questions, it's rarely, a perfect stream and this ideal stream where you ask a question, do an experiment, it works, you publish, and everything is super great. It's never like that. And so sometimes it can be really redundant because projects can take a life of their own pretty often. So especially when you're doing things involving a lot of repetition, patience is really key, and burnout is understandable. And so at best, if you have a supportive mentor, you can communicate with them about this and say, hey, I've been doing this for weeks, it's not working. Like, how should I progress? Is this normal? And meanwhile, you want to be able to take care of yourself. So we encourage you to take breaks when it's necessary. We encourage you to ask for non-science related advice. So asking, how can I continue to keep my head up when this keeps going wrong? You can plan out your research milestones, but make sure to be patient and allow for change. You can reflect and see how far you've come, so you can recognize that, hey, maybe like 2 months ago, I didn't even know what this meant, and now I can do this whole process start to finish, or at least be able to explain it. So even each step is very important to kind of acknowledge how much progress you've made. You can ask your mentor for advice. Like I said, a great mentor will be supportive, and you don't necessarily have to settle for mentorship that you might feel uncomfortable with. So if you have a PI that maybe is treating you a bit unfairly, isn't communicating with you or being honest with you about your progress, is possibly shorting you from being able to be credited for your work when something gets published, those are things you are absolutely allowed to stand up for yourself on, even though you're an undergrad. And then finally, my main point as well is to keep an eye on the big picture. So especially when you're doing these repetitive sorts of maybe running repetitive models, troubleshooting, debugging, keep an eye on like, what is the main question that I'm even interested in. Maybe that will help you to center yourself when you might be kind of digging into a hole and maybe trying to figure out what the next step is going to be. It's really interesting to do research and to cast light on things that are unknown, but keeping an eye on the big picture will help you to continue down the right path. So does anyone have questions about the things that I've kind of introduced, maybe trying to highlight some more details about what seems like an abstract process? Yes, I do wait an uncomfortably long time, so. Okay, feel free to ask questions at the end too. All right, we're gonna get into our myth or fact activity. And so what we're gonna be doing is using Jamboard, which we'll give you the link for next. And if you aren't familiar with Jamboard, basically you can access this link, and as long as you're using some valid Google account, you'll be able to use the sticky note feature, and we'll basically ask you if something is a myth or a fact, and you'll write on that sticky note myth or fact, and we'll kind of talk about whether some of these concerns are pretty common, whether they are myths or facts. So we'll maybe debunk some concerns that you have too, and I can put this in the Zoom chat as well. Yeah, I'm glad I read your mind. Give me 1 second to do this, because I'm typing on the spot. Like that. Okay, we'll give us a minute to get on that link. And if anyone has trouble with it, let us know. No. Good on time, I think. I'm using eye contact as a proxy for completion. Okay. Should I open the Jamboard? That would probably be best. And guess what I have? The Jamboard. Awesome. So I see a lot of anonymous animals. That's pretty good. Oh, and people. Awesome. Okay, so these are the slides of the Jamboard. You can navigate it using these frames. Make this full screen. And I think someone's already kind of on top of this. And so you can use the sticky note feature over here and say myth or false. You can use a bool, that's fine. And you can put them into this. And yeah, so the first one that we have, the first statement is, I need to read every paper front to back in order of the contents in order to understand everything. So go ahead and insert what you think the validity of this statement is. Oh, or you can make it, it's there. They're like, you can organize this much better. Okay. Okay. It seems like most people are saying myth or false, and also drawing us really cool pictures. So this would probably be something we also say is false. And so kind of like Sagar touched on, which you guys picked up on, is that you only really need to read the abstracts of a couple papers in order to get enough information for what your lab is doing. And also the way to read a paper isn't necessarily front to back. So if you haven't taught how to read a paper, you might have been taught in different ways. So you might have seen that, you should read the abstract and then the methods and the figures and then the conclusion. But in reality, you can kind of skip around on a research paper depending upon what is most interesting to you. Oh, thanks. And so if you, for instance, just read the abstract and then you go down to the figures and you see what kind of data they're collecting, you might want, then you revisit sort of the methods and see how they collected it. You can do this in sort of a nonlinear process that also helps you to understand what the gist of the paper is. But you also don't need to read like every paper that lab has published ever or front to back in order to understand everything. So we'll go into the next one. I'll just check the chat really quick. You're welcome. Okay. Cool. You want to take the next one? All right. Need to take this. There you go.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the next. Oop, why did I do that? Okay, we're going to move on to the next. And I see some people have already started. Oh, thank you for that. So this one is, I need to read all of a lab's papers before an interview. Okay, seems like a lot of people are choosing myth. And I love the star. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, you guys are right. You do not need to read all of a lab's papers before an interview. That would be a lot of work. And obviously, like if you want to, go ahead, but it's not necessary. Like Sagar was kind of talking about, reading a couple of the most current ones will be more than enough, and just kind of focusing on what they're doing now rather than like every single experiment they've ever done ever. And yeah, you can also use the kind of process Rakshita was talking about on the last slide to save time and kind of get the gist of the paper while also being informed before your interview.
Some labs also have like hundreds of papers, so I would not recommend this. Okay.
Whoa.
I'm allowed to leave a lab and join another to try out a new project. So you all can add myth or fact, and whoever's joined that turtle is doing really good, actually.
Yeah, go Terps.
Yay, it's Maryland branded. Yeah, I think all of you are touching on it. It is a fact. You can leave your lab and join another one, try a new project. You are not committed. You're an undergraduate student who does not get paid to do research in your lab most of the time. So you do not need to stay in that lab. If you don't like that project, you want to explore something new, definitely go for it. In fact, like the professors at your lab, if they're good professors, will encourage you to do this as well. So you can definitely leave a lab and join another one.
Yes, and one more announcement is that even if you're part of a lab that's perhaps at a university and you find a program like a summer program where you can do a research experience that is at a different university or virtual, depending upon your trajectory for your research in that lab and working with your mentors, you're more than welcome to pursue those opportunities, even if they're a bit simultaneous. So I know people who spent the summer doing like a research experience at a different university and then came back to their home lab at that university. So feel free to explore and make sure you're communicative about your commitments to make sure that you're getting the most out of both labs. All right, I'm waiting to see the artwork on the next one. Oh, okay. Great, so you guys have already started on this, but we wanted to present, I need to have extensive knowledge on the topic in order to earn a position in the lab. So many of you are already saying myth. Oh, any requests for this anonymous artist?
Draw a pumpkin for Halloween.
Draw a jack-o'-lantern. But yeah, many of you are already saying myth. So like you might have picked up on when we talked about it, you don't need to know everything when you go into the lab. And you also don't need to directly follow a trajectory of your past experiences either. So kind of like we've mentioned, if you show how you're interested in what the lab is currently doing and that you're enthusiastic to learn, guided by your own curiosity, techniques are trainable. And what's mostly important though is that you have genuine interest and excitement to be there. So feel free to, come in, learn something new, and there are people who will support you with that supportive lab. Great. So our last slide. We got what we wanted.
Okay, last one is I should have some experience in the lab, specialized techniques in order to be accepted. I see a lot of people have already put in their votes. Yeah, so that is a myth. Rakshita kind of went over this on her part of the presentation where you're really there to learn and you're not expected to be an expert already just going in as like an 18 or 19 or 20-year-old. And like this is an experience for you to like ask questions, learn new techniques. You will not be expected to know how to do everything perfectly. And also, like, I want to reiterate kind of what Rakshi was saying is to ask questions if you're not sure how to do something, if you feel like you're doing something wrong, just ask someone. And it's better to ask and kind of, catch it before it goes wrong than to, just keep going. A sorting hat.
Oh, nice.
I thought it was a witch hat. Okay, I still like it though. Thank you.
So these are, well, there's a new slide here. I think maybe that was a clean canvas. But yeah, these are some of the myths that we wanted to show or facts. And you guys picked up on it really quickly. So great job on this. So now we're kind of going to open up the last 20 minutes to questions you have. Whether those questions are specifically related to getting into research lab or just related to college experiences or STEM careers in general, we're totally open to. Nice sorting hat. Yes, sweet turtle. Okay, you got some compliments. So we'll leave these through the link that you saw in this presentation. And to close a couple of these things off before we get into these questions, so you can ask us anything. We also have a little list of opportunities that I appended to this at the end of the presentation with some organizations that offer these kinds of research opportunities to undergrads. They're not just UMD based, so you can find them all over the nation. And some of these programs, have different attributes about like what your requirement will be and how you might either be compensated or not. But basically, there's a lot of ways through which you can learn and do research. Yes, I'll put in the slideshow now. Okay. So yeah, this is your opportunity to open forum, ask us anything. Regardless of like what you might be interested in. And in order to keep in touch with us, these are our social medias as well as our email and our link to our website where you'll find all of the modules we've uploaded in the past free to use. And we'll also be posting regularly on Instagram, so feel free to connect with us.
I can also hand around this mic if, I think that'll connect to Zoom better.
Yeah.
So I will do that.
Hi. I was just wondering how you guys think that we should like I'm a CS major. How I No, like to what extent we should look for like other like big corporation type research versus internal lab type research, to what extent, it would look better, especially in the beginning of a CS career versus the end, and how we should map that out in order to like maximize our knowledge and stuff.
Do any of you guys want to take the answer first? Or?
If it's specifically for computer science research, is like that your question, or just like research in general? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sagar can speak on that because he does CS.
Yeah, okay. So I would say maybe at the beginning of your career, it's a little bit easier to do research at a university since you can find opportunities easier, professors are willing to take you on. For those corporate research opportunities in CS, some like the federal agencies, it might be a little bit easier to get into. But like if you want to go work for like a company, like say I want to do research as a research intern for like OpenAI, something like that. then in those companies might be a little bit more, you'll need to have experience to get that position. So usually like some university experiences can help you build that initial experience, and then you can use that on your resume to get those professional experiences in a research lab as well. At least for CS, I think that might be an easier trajectory to kind of get into those labs. But I definitely think those labs are very valuable too, the ones that are outside of the university, because at the university we'll be kind of biased towards a specific type of research. So getting those outside exposures is pretty valuable. Yeah.
And Sagar also, oh, sorry. Was that me?
You're good.
Okay. Sagar also has worked at, what are they called? Startups. So like, talk about that, Sagar.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I've worked at a couple of companies before, mainly in software engineering, as internships. But a lot of the times I end up working on something's closer to research. Like I'll end up using the research process. So something that we didn't really talk about here was that like a lot of these questions that you ask and the process you take to actually answering them is pretty useful if you're just doing SWE as well. Like you'll end up having to interview users. You'll end up having to do that research and find out like the best components that you can use, and then finally implement it and test it out and get results. So if you get used to this research process, it can be pretty valuable in a normal software engineering job as well. So definitely valuable skills to have. Any other questions from the audience?
Really, anything on your mind? Anything that wasn't clear from the presentation? Anything about college? How many of you guys are high schoolers? I heard high schoolers come. Oh,
Oh,
okay.
so sad.
That's okay.
We have scared away the high schoolers. How many of you are currently involved or trying to get involved with research? Oh, okay. A lot of you, yeah. Anyone who, any roadblocks, like any things that you feel like are holding you back from getting into research? For those of you that didn't raise your hand.
Oh, go ahead.
A lot of opportunities aren't available to freshmen. They're more for like upperclassmen as juniors and seniors.
So I can maybe start with the answer to this one. When I looked for an opportunity, I actually didn't go through like the formal channels. I just found a professor. I like looked at the CS pages, and then I found a professor that I liked, and I just walked into his office hours and was like, would you be willing to talk about your research? Like, and that's how I kicked off the conversation. So definitely as a freshman, a sophomore, there's that stigma of like, oh, you're so new. Do you know enough to do a research position? But usually once you talk to them, you go in prepared, read those papers and talk about their research, they'll see that they'll want to take you on. So I would definitely advise that if you feel like maybe you don't have enough experience or the opportunities aren't available, you can also create them by just walking in, talking to professors, and then finding that opportunity as well.
There are also like programs through like federal agencies and companies that are for like anyone. Like the one that comes to mind for me is the NIH summer internship program. I did that as a high schooler, and they also offer it for like undergraduates as well. And that's how I got started in my lab. And so if you feel like the professors aren't really super receptive and you're a little intimidated by that, maybe look into more formal programs and that like take people like that don't have like an age requirement or anything like that other than like 18 plus, and that could be a way for you to start your research career.
Do we have more questions? Oh, Sanjana.
What if you get intimidated by talking to a professor?
I was hoping a question like this would show up because yeah, I wanted like hopefully to debunk some of that too. So the intimidation of talking to professors, you might be facing a lot of imposter syndrome, maybe because you don't see yourself represented in research that often, maybe because you are so new to what the professor is doing. And so there is that intimidation that is completely valid, and that fear is completely understandable. But that's important to remember that, like, you know, putting it into perspective, you're the student and that person is supposed to support you. And they're not just a professor who's doing research and trying to get themselves published, but they should also at best be cultivating the next generation of scientists. And so what I would advise with that intimidation factor, it's completely understandable. But the more prepared you are for the interview, the more ready you are to talk to them about their research. That can sort of help ward off some of that, knowledge gap that you might be feeling. And on top of that, try to remember that like you're doing your best and you're pursuing something you're interested in. And so as long as that person makes you feel welcome, then you're completely allowed to be sort of novice compared to where they are, if that makes sense. And if you ever like feel, that's where having a support system is really helpful. People who can celebrate with you after you send your first email, for example, people who have your back, that can definitely come in handy too. So that's kind of my take on it. I don't know if you guys have other things you want to add to from your experiences.
I think, yeah, like just being confident, kind of fake it till you make it, make sure you're informed going in. And also like depending on the professor, like once you like say hi and kind of get an idea of their personality, like you can be honest and be like, look, like I'm a little like unsure about like where to start with research, but I'm really interested in what you're doing and I'd love to like learn more. Yeah, like you can own your like insecurity. Like we've all been there. They've probably been there when they were your age. So hopefully they're nice and they'll see that as like you being genuine. Any other questions?
I have a question for anyone in the crowd who is a researcher, who thinks we missed anything, or who has any bits of advice that we aren't the only ones sharing. Feel free to volunteer that too. I feel like this can be more of an open discussion as well, and we're always learning too. Which time is there? It's 10 more minutes. Oh, go ahead, Ayana.
I'll just mention this because there was a question about industry research. There are some programs that are through like sort of bigger companies that are sort of directed towards undergraduates. So like Microsoft has one, for example, it's like their Microsoft undergraduate research program that's supposed to support, supposed to support like younger researchers who are coming up, trying to apply to grad school, all that stuff that may be of interest to some folks in the audience.
Thank you.
That's a really good point. I mean, I remember looking at opportunities and then like I looked at Google research opportunities and I was like, wow, it's like a co-op. If I'd planned this in my semester schedule, maybe I could have done it. So if you're thinking about those, also think ahead, like plan them out, research them, and make them fit into your schedule as well. Any additional questions or comments or things that people are thinking about research?
Cool stuff that you want to share. A hand.
This might be a little broad of a question, but like I was wondering if you could maybe like explain like your experience like coming into a lab and kind of like what you thought it was going to be like versus like what it actually is like.
Yeah, I mean, I can go. So I first came into a research lab, a neuroscience research lab at UMD when I was a freshman. So I'd come out of like doing a little bit of research in high school and then not really doing like my own project or anything like that, but coming in knowing that like I liked the lab environment, I wanted to keep going. And so when I came in, my, conception was like, oh, like, I'll learn all these things and then I'll put them to use and then I'll get some result or I'll learn something new. Sure. Something that I didn't learn until even now is just how much patience and time is involved with research. So depending on what kind of work you're doing, you coming in with a goal that is lofty, kind of sometimes have to check in with yourself and be like, okay, like this experiment worked today, or I need to work on this tomorrow, and sort of breaking down this larger idea of what you want to do into more manageable chunks is something that I learned. So while I thought it was a very linear process and that, my thinking was more of the ideal, what I've learned over time is just that, doing things like one step at a time and thinking through things procedurally when it comes to science is very useful for making sure that you learn a lot from what you're doing, and also not get discouraged when things don't go exactly how you plan. And another thing I would just like want to mention is like learning, like I mentioned, like learning is more important than producing. I've met people who, you know, come in with like this end goal of like, I'm going to publish by the end. And that's a great initiative to have, that you want that experience of publishing papers. You want that experience like presenting at conferences. It's wonderful. And so you should definitely keep that in mind as like something you could potentially do after your project. But I would say like, try to check in every day and be like, okay, I learned this. And being, you know, satisfied with that sometimes helps you get through the research process when things might not be going your way all the time. So I learned that it takes a lot more time and a lot more patience than I expected.
Yeah, I entered a lab when I was in high school, and it's the lab I still work at today. I like bounced around some labs at UMD, but this is like the longest, I guess, experience I've had. And going in, like I was pretty nervous. I was only like high schooler, like I was the youngest person in the lab. And I really didn't know how to do anything, but something that I guess like surprised me was that like everyone was so nice. Everyone was very helpful. Like I didn't really feel that lost. I always felt like I could ask questions, and that's why it's so important for everyone who's starting out in research, or even like during research, if you don't know what to do or you feel like confused about something, definitely ask. And I guess, yeah, like people in research are usually very nice. So, you know, become friends with your like coworkers. That's one of my advice. Makes things a lot more fun. And yeah.
I think one thing that surprised me when I joined the lab was that there was actually a lot of flexibility. And I mean this in many ways. The first was like, it wasn't like like if I needed some time to do schoolwork and I couldn't work on this research work, it was really easy to tell the professor, hey, I can't do this right now. I need to focus on other things. Let me come back to it in a week or two. So there was like that time flexibility of commitment. There's also the flexibility of like, I kind of just pitched an idea. I was like, I really want to work on this field. Can I just work on it? And my professor was like, yeah, sure, go run with it. I'll help, I'll support you. And he just let me go ahead and go with it. And like, it also kind of led to like the ability, even as an undergraduate student, for me to just like pitch ideas or things I thought that were interesting that I thought we should focus on. And I suppose like it was nice because like I didn't think, as an undergraduate student compared to a professor, you're always thinking, oh, the professor knows way more. What could I possibly contribute that the professor already doesn't know? But CS is such a huge field. There's always new things happening and new things, that new papers that are coming out, new techniques. So it's also, I feel like professors are very willing to listen to you. They don't really hold that, once you're actually in the lab, they don't hold some stigma that like you aren't able to contribute and you don't have a voice or anything like that. So yeah, for me, the biggest surprising thing was like the amount of flexibility that I had in my lab.
All right, we're coming up on the last 5 minutes. So we'll take any remaining questions, but we also understand if you are ready to head out soon. So we put these links up so that if you, I suppose if there's no high school students for real, then maybe there won't be a necessity for this link, but specifically the link to join our Slack. So if you're part of UMD or even not part of UMD, but you want to stay connected with us more directly, or again, if you're part of UMD and you want to maybe join our organization, we're always taking people, feel free to join our Slack. This is our invite for it. And then we also reiterate that you can find us at any one of these links as well. But yeah, overall, thank you all for coming. We'll stick around if you have questions and want to approach us. But yeah, we really appreciate it. And we wish you all the best moving forward. Okay, that's the one.